Hello, everyone. Anything to anybody?
Hello.
It is Thursday, October 20th, 11:56 a.m. Eastern Time, and it's the Dave and Dan Show.
Well,
We
we'll
are,
call it the Dan and Dave Show.
well, you always say Dan and Dave. It's really the Dave and Dan Show, but whatever. I'm a little biased, Dave. I honestly believe that between the experience between the two of us, which is 100 years plus now, that particularly from a whatever geopolitical business point of view, investing, we have a lot to offer, but I'll leave that there. So here's what I'm thinking, right? So I really think the West, in a lot of ways, Western Europe, United States, Canada, whatever, but particularly Western Europe, US, is dropping the ball big time in so many ways. All right, just to be Mr. Obvious, one particular way right now, which is huge, and we're not giving it a lot of attention and credence right now, is Brazil. And I think a lot of Americans are missing this. I think our administration, current administration, Biden in particular, is missing this big time drop on the ball. They're not even paying attention to Brazil. They should be. Now, why is that? They're the biggest country in South America and in Central and Latin America. Okay. They're massive. They're the biggest country in the Southern Hemisphere. Okay.
Can you biggest in what way?
Biggest land wise and biggest, I believe, population wise. And where am I going with this? Because they're so big land wise, they are a plethora of resources, natural resources, from land to cattle to iron ore to gold, uh, you know, arable land, etc., on and on and on. Okay. And the powers that be, oh, by the way, which are not dumb and have been planning this stuff for 10 plus years now, AKA Russia and China, know this. Okay. And where am I going with this? BRIC nations in a nutshell. If you do a quick survey with most Americans or a good portion of them, they've never even heard of BRIC nations. They don't even know what you're referring to. Okay. And that's scary. Okay. So we're coming up at a crossroad real quick, particularly with the Brazilian um, um, elections that are going on at the moment between Jair Bolsonaro, and Lula. Basically, what we have here, folks, is a showdown between democracy and outright socialism. Lula representing socialism, Bolsonaro essentially, free markets and capitalism and democracy. Why is this a big deal? This is a huge deal, in my opinion. Brazil is in our backyard, number one. They're in the West, and they're just south of us. They're not that far. The Russians and the Chinese know this. They are rich with all kinds of resources, even a good workforce in a lot of ways, minus their corruption. Okay. The culture tends to be very hardworking. They're pretty bright people, very bright and hardworking. And they're a G20 country, chocked with tons of resources in our backyard. So if the Russians and the Chinese, which are coming together, we know this, get a foothold there, which they could. What's going to exacerbate that foothold is Lula, in my opinion, winning this election, right? Because the minute he wins the election, if he does, okay, that BRIC union is, in my opinion, is going to be solidified that much more. And then at that point, it's going to roll out the red carpet for China and Russia to just come on in, right? And that will also speed up not only the BRIC nation, union and stuff like that, but also problematically speed up problems, if you will, for the West in general, particularly the United States. The continued deterioration and speeding up of, if you will, of the world reserve currency, etc. Right? Absolutely, will send it over the precipice, in my opinion. That's my thesis for what's going on at the moment. Not to mention that Biden, he's already thinking about the whatchamacallit, opening up our oil reserves and stuff, right? Because
it's already done, man. He's releasing like 1 million gallons a day or a week, whatever it
I
is.
know, and look, it's not about politics to me
Releasing
anymore.
the strategic reserves.
Yeah, it's not about politics, folks, anymore. This is about basic survival here, okay? Regardless of Democrat, Republican, and everything in between, okay? This administration, and there's no perfect administration, but they're
So
just...
Dan, you're a typical American attitude where, okay, instead of focusing on what we need to do better, you're now worrying about Brazil
No,
and saying that
no,
we should be basically manipulating the results there so
no,
that we get the result
no,
that we want.
no.
Because as long as the United States stays afloat, who gives a about Brazil?
No, I wasn't inferring that whatsoever, because the reality is we are...
Because if you are Brazilian, why wouldn't you join the Russian and Chinese?
Okay, so I'm not blaming them. The way I see it, they've got 1 foot in one camp, 1 foot in the other camp. What do I mean by that? 1 foot with the West and 1 foot with the East. And the way I see it, they're just at this point kind of sitting back and waiting to see who wins out, if you will, in this Duke Fest. Okay. And then they will make their move at that point. That's my opinion. That's what I see them doing. I can't say I blame them. So I am not inferring whatsoever about, manipulating or influencing their election in any way, shape, or form. But what I am saying directly is, if Lula wins, you are going to see the pedal to the metal like you've never seen before, in my opinion. And it won't be good for the U.S. That's what I am saying.
Well, I just read an article on Al Jazeera that said Bolsonaro is pretty much, even though he came in second and is forced a runoff at the end of the month, that the congressional, and do you know how their country is set up as far as a political system? Are they set up like us or like England? But what it said was the congressional seats, since they have had free elections over the last 40 years, since they came out of a military dictator
in the late 60s,
right, that this is Bolsonaro just had the most amount of seats won for his party that has ever been won in a general election. So they're saying, Al Jazeera is saying that whether this guy wins or loses, if Lula gets in, he's going to have basically an uphill battle because he's going to be facing congressional resistance of another party. So it sounds like there's going to be gridlock.
And that's a great point. Yeah, I was aware of that. That's a good point. Bolsonaro has a lot of what's equivalent to, I guess, the Brazilian House. In terms of their government, they're definitely more in line with how the U.S. government's set up with the president.
Are they a republic? I know nothing about Brazil.
Are a republic. They're absolutely a republic. They've been a republic.
So they have a Congress and...
Yes. They're republic. They're not parliamentary like Britain and stuff with a prime minister and stuff that floats to the top. They're more like us. They're more in line like us. They do. Yeah, they essentially have congressmen and women, essentially. I don't know if it's exactly like senators and House of Representatives, but they essentially have a Congress and a president and stuff like that. Absolutely.
Well, this article also said that the Supreme Court in Brazil has been, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bolsonaro is the current president.
Correct.
And Lula used to be the president 10 years ago.
Correct.
And I don't know where he's been, whether he's been in jail or on a farm. I don't know. But he's now running again. And it's a different election process than the United States because they have a runoff and now it's going to be another runoff between the top two guys.
Right.
Okay. So it is different than the US in that way. Okay. Well, yeah. And the way the article was saying that the Supreme Court over the last 10 years has been a very good balancing act against the corruption in government. And they've been regulating that in some way. It didn't get into specifics. And it was saying that, I don't know if it said if Lula got into office, that they're concerned that he would start replacing the Supreme Court justices, which I guess you can do down there, unlike here. And so It's the same old thing, Dan. I mean, I'm sure Brazil is run by the very few people. I'm sure that the majority of people are not represented. I've never been to Brazil, and I don't know a lot about it, except I know Brazil was the last country in the world to abolish slavery. That's the only thing that I know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it sounds like Brazil, just like a lot of countries in the world, it sounds like they're another country that is a candidate for division, breaking apart, because like the United States, you could argue the United States right now, we're at the point now where we just need to break apart into multiple smaller countries because we're never going to agree. And it sounds like Brazil is that way as well, because you have just like Mexico, where you have European blood and indigenous blood. And there's a lot of racism and division in Mexico between those two factors. And it typically tends to be the European blood that's on top of the class system, the caste system. And I think Brazil is probably similar.
As far as I know, I would say that's a true statement from what I can tell as well.
And I also read in this article, and again, I don't know if it's true, that like the United States, over the last 10 years, Brazil has deindustrialized and has become now one of the biggest agribusinesses, agri-farming in the world. So that it sounds like that they're going more agricultural, and the people who are the farmers in the rural areas are becoming more powerful.
I think there's some truth to that as well. Yeah, because they have incredible amounts of land, incredible amounts of livestock, cattle, etc. They export a ton of their resources, including, beef. They're the second or third biggest trader, at least currently, with the U.S. For example, we get a ton of, beef from them and other stuff.
And it sounds like they're destroying a lot of the Amazon River for the agricultural development.
Yeah, to your point, they can. I think they do. I think they've slowed down, but they do continue to strip away a lot of the Amazon forest. Amazonia is one of the states. There's, I think, 26 or 28 states in Brazil. Amazonia is one of them. It's in northwest Brazil, and it's an absolutely massive state.
Well, Brazil, the only reason I'm mentioning this is because for a country to do well economically, and like you said, they're a member of the G20, they have to have something that the rest of the world wants. And so what does Brazil have? Brazil has a lot of natural resources.
100%. Chock full of resources.
And they're in a good location as far as, Russia and China, they're over on the other side of the world. So to have a partner in South America might not be a bad thing for BRICS.
Well, and that's part of my point as well. And that was my leading premise.
Because they are in the BRICS already. It's not like they're going to join. They have been a member from the beginning of the BRICS. In fact, the very first letter, B, for Brazil.
Yeah. And just to clarify for those folks out there that aren't familiar with the BRIC nations, it's essentially, guys, a trading union that's been around since 2014 initially. And to Dave's point, BRICS, okay? Meaning
and what happened in 2014 that caused this to happen?
I didn't think about that, but you're not talking about the Ukraine and all that, are you?
Yeah, that's when
we installed. And this is right. And this is what a lot of Americans don't understand. We installed that bozo that's running the Ukraine at the moment. Okay. We overthrew, I forget the other person's name, and installed this guy. But
that's when Russia and China started coming together saying, hey, it looks like, we haven't been the best of friends over the years, but, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very good point, Dave, for connecting the dots. And a lot of people don't connect the dots, particularly our own government, from what I can tell. That's when the Russians started forming this. So, getting back to BRICS real quick, it stands for 5 nations. Brazil, number 1, R for Russia, right? I for India, C for China, S for South Africa. Okay. This is a formal trading union, guys.
And they're talking about another I for Iran.
Iran, exactly.
And A at the end, they want to change it to BRICSA for the A for Argentina.
Great point. Now, so where I was going to go with this is, and you already beat me to it, is that this is only the beginning, folks, in my opinion. Okay, so when you've got the likes of Russia, China, and India, for example, which are the three biggest nations on the planet, oh, by the way, and together combined, they have a lot of resources. So take Russia, for example. They're similar to Brazil in a lot of ways in that they have a lot of natural resources. What they don't have, for example, is like electronics, semiconductors, that type of thing. That's where China comes in. That's where that synergy starts to build, right? So you take the natural resources with the semiconductors.
And Taiwan.
And exactly. Why do you think China's got their eyes on Taiwan now, guys? Okay. So, the way the
where else have I said that I think China's going to go?
Well, Taiwan, you said. Where else? You tell me. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I've been saying it for 10 years. I think that they're going to take the entire the Incheon Peninsula, all of Korea.
I wouldn't be surprised. Would not be surprised at all.
If you take South Korea and Taiwan off the board, whoa.
Yeah, when you talk technology and you talk electronics and the capacitors, the transistors, that's where all that stuff comes from, guys, right? So the way I see it, Western Europe and the US has been totally playing it wrong with all these sanctions. Okay. They were leading with telecasting their right punch or hook and in return getting counterpunched real quick. Putin's played this, in my opinion, not that I'm a Putin fan, but if you step back and you look at it objectively, like it's a boxing match, he, in my opinion, has played this brilliantly. He has counterpunched us every step of the way. Every time we've tried to get a shot off, he's been in our face, whether you like it or not. And most Americans either aren't paying attention or they won't admit that for whatever reason, because, we're
even better, Dan, he has his adversaries doing what he wants them to do.
100% on top.
And they don't even know that they're walking into his trap.
Yeah. I mean, he's played it brilliant. Okay. And then you take the BRIC nations. He's not a dummy. If Lula wins, okay, I wouldn't be surprised if Putin is coordinating alongside with the Chinese with Lula in the background as much as possible, because if they can turn this election and Lula wins, Lula's going to roll out the red carpet to the BRICS, 100%. And that is going to exacerbate and speed up, and whatever other term you want to use, the downfall of the West. 100%. That's my opinion. That's my thesis. I'm willing to be wrong. I hope I'm dead wrong, but that's how I see it. And once the BRICS continue to grow in stature, which it has been, okay, other nations are going to step back and they're going to be like,
Well, when BRICS
maybe
reformed,
I should get involved in this, because this is the next superpower / union, and I want to be a part of this.
When the BRICS were formed and they formed this economic union, they also formed their own versions of the IMF and the Gold Fund. The BRICS also have created the alternative to the Swiss system.
100%.
Okay. And so when they did all this back in 2014, every country in the world, except for 2, asked to join this organization. And I've asked you this before, so let's see if you remember. Which 2 are the ones that said they did not want to join, but everybody else did?
One of them's a no-brainer. That's the U.S., absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, Britain? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the UK.
That would
the UK, London specifically. Okay, London and Washington are really 2 of the most evil places on earth. I mean, if you look at the history of man, obviously it's like evil people probably don't consider themselves evil. But when you subjugate the rest of the world for your own benefit, I'd say that's evil, because you're not treating others the way you want to be treated.
Okay, so I guess
so
I guess what I would say in addition to that, or as an ancillary, is that I'm not surprised that the U.S. and Britain didn't ask to join for 2 basic reasons, or 1 basic reason. New York and London, those are the financial, at least at the moment, epicenters, whatever you want to call them, of the world, right? So why would they ask to join? That's like saying, okay, can I join you and relinquish my financial superpower, statehood, and blah, 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 and bow down to you? That's not going to happen. So not surprised at all that they saw it, in my opinion, and view it as they probably should, as a direct threat.
So let's bring it back to what you wanted to talk about so we don't go off on a tangent on China and Russia. If you were, okay, you're going to have to do most of the heavy lifting here, Dan, because I would say your wife probably would not be considered one of the higher ends of the Brazilian society. She would probably be more of an indigenous working person. Yes, no?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not criticizing her. I'm just saying that that's how this division is in Brazil. She wouldn't be in the Bolsonaro camp.
Well, she absolutely is in this camp. She wants him to win, but I see what you're saying. Maybe you're saying from a demographic perspective and targeting perspective. I don't know. Would they? Because
Bolsonaro seems to be the rich right-wing extremist party.
Well, with white European background and ancestry, yeah. Right. So, I mean, prejudice still exists in Brazil today, like in the US, right? Racism and stuff like that. It's sort of underlying. I don't think they like to talk about it probably as much, like we don't here, but we know it sort of exists, right?
So, yeah, and I've never been there, but you're going to have to tell me, but Brazil seems to be more of a third world country from the standpoint they have very few people controlling the majority of the wealth. And then everybody else lives in like a shanty town.
Okay, so I guess based on what I know what I would say is that they definitely have the upper class or the elite that essentially runs everything, kind of sort of like here. They definitely have poor people. And from what I can tell, there's definitely a middle class in Brazil. Now, is it as big as ours? And is it as, as big and as prevalent and stuff? From what I gander and gather and having looked at it, studied it, been exposed, the answer would be no. Not nearly as developed and as big as ours, right? But it does exist. But probably more people are on the lower end, if I had to guess. I mean, once you get outside the major cities like Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, Belo Horizonte, and cities like that, there's like 10 or 12 major cities in the country that are very big. But Sao Paulo and Rio are the most
But let's explore. So why would Joe think that Brazil aligning with the USA is better for Brazil than Brazil aligning with Russia and China? That makes no sense to me.
Okay, so I'm not sure where you got that question from. I don't think she.
Well, you just told me she's a big supporter of Bolsonaro.
Well, she is, because she's a supporter of.
And you're saying Bolsonaro.
She's a supporter of essentially democracy versus socialism / communism. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because she has seen what socialism / communism has done to Central and South America in general. I mean, that those countries in general have fallen prey to socialism over the years. And what have you gotten from it? Juntas, a strongman running the show, whether it was Noriega in the 80s or whatever, or Bolivia in the 60s. Granted, we've had our paws in there too. I know that in the background, but Brazil, 50 years ago, being run by the military. I mean, what country wants to be run by the military, right? I mean, in general, right? If a country's being run by the military, guys, we all know this, right? It's probably not a good thing if the general's running the show, right? I mean, the purpose of a military should be for defensive purposes only, right? You only fight when you need to, God forbid. But it shouldn't be to run a country. The last time I checked, when I studying, democracy versus socialism versus fascism, etc. I don't think you want Benito Mussolini running the show, right? The Italians tried that, and what happened to him at the end of the war, I think everybody knows, right? So, and it doesn't help the people, right? So those are her basic reasons, right? She understands at a basic level what it's.
You didn't answer my question.
Which was what?
Why would she want Brazil aligning with the United States instead of Russia and China?
So I guess the basic.
Like the United States has been such a great friend to Brazil.
Well, they have been very pretty good friends and partners and stuff like this. And if you have a choice, I mean, if she had a choice, she'd rather be more with a country that's more democratic than versus socialism, right? I mean, are we heading down the socialism path? Yeah, absolutely. I hope we don't get there, but let's face it. I mean,
so you're saying that Russia and China economically are socialist compared to the United States?
Well, they're definitely socialist compared to how they run their government overall. They're definitely a little more centralized, probably, in terms of being involved in stuff.
We're talking economics.
I am talking economics. Yeah. Yeah. We might be on equal footing potentially at this point because of how we've been sticking our hands in there. At the end of the day, the Chinese Communist Party is still at the center of everything and ultimately gives the yay or nay. Just ask Jack Ma, right? Especially if you start saying stuff that they don't like, right?
Yep.
So, I hear you, but then the other thing that I would add to what you just said is, so I do think there's truth with starting businesses and stuff, but here's the problem, and you know this. In terms of rules, laws, and regulations, they're still woefully behind. That's why they can produce all this stuff a hell of a lot cheaper. They don't worry about benefits. They don't worry about the 15-year-old in the factory, okay, etc. So to me, it's like a boxing.
Who are you to determine what a country decides is acceptable or not?
I'm not.
That's not our goal.
Okay, so I didn't say it's up to me to decide that, but where I was going with that is it's like being in the boxing match and we're fighting by the Queensberry rules, meaning in terms of economics, rules, laws, and regulations. They're not fighting by any rules. You're not going to win in that case. It's not going to happen. You're not going to win. So, is it any wonder why they're able to undercut us and drive a lot of our businesses out of business? Because, they can pollute a river, for example, and there's no cost for them to bear or to worry about that, right? Or they can pollute their atmosphere, right? We've decided that there has to be certain rule of law with things, as imperfect as we are. And hence our costs are higher, and we have to pay a certain wage and have certain benefits.
You're saying buzzwords that aren't really.
I'm telling you what I think. Now, if we want to go down that road, we can do that and start paying everybody $6 an hour friggin' slave wages and slide into the fifth world to compete with them. I suppose we can.
That is a form of socialism. Okay? It's a form of socialism.
What's a form of socialism? What is
minimum wage?
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't think I would debate that. I do agree that we shouldn't mess with minimum wage. Maybe we shouldn't even have minimum wage. I mean, you should have the markets ultimately through the laws of supply and demand determine what the wage should be for a particular service or skill set, right?
What's the population of Brazil?
211 million, the last I knew.
Okay, well, that's getting pretty close to the United States population levels.
Which is about 330, yeah.
Okay, so, and what percentage of that population would you say is in poverty?
Great question.
70%?
I don't think it's that high. Honestly, I don't know, man. I mean, I would say 30 to 50% tops. That's still a lot. I mean,
I'll have to take your word for it, but from what I've seen,
I don't know,
videos and articles that I've seen,
yeah,
it looks like it's in worse shape than Mexico. And I would venture to say that Mexico, their poverty level is at least 50%.
Okay, so well, what I was going to say,
so I'm thinking Brazil is probably 70, 80% of the people are in poverty.
It could be 2/3 potentially. I agree with you. It could be 2/3. I honestly don't know that stat. I don't know. I'm guessing. But even if it's 30 to 50%, let's take the middle number 40. That's high. That's 1 out of 2 are in poverty.
Well, the reason I'm leading you down this path is, why do you think that the Chinese people support whatever their government is, regardless of whatever faults they have.
Mhm.
It's because over the last 20 years, economically, they've done better.
They've done
50
very well. Absolutely.
50 years ago in China, people would ask, "Ni吃了吗?" which means, "Have you eaten?" And today it means, "Hey, how you doing? How you doing? You doing good?" Back then it actually meant, "Hey, are you starving? Have you had anything to eat?"
Yeah.
So China has made advancements that Brazil probably would love to have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that
Whereas
was a
the United
literal
States
question.
is going-
Yeah.
The United States is going backwards.
I don't argue. I can't argue with that. I agree. We're on a bad trajectory. Totally, man. I totally agree with you. We are on a bad trajectory in this administration, not to point fingers. It's not about politics now. It's about survival. It's not helping. I mean, they're pointing the nose of the plane even further down at a steeper angle, in my opinion, whether they're trying to or not. 100%. I mean, he slapped the Saudis in the face, right? They're turning more and more to the east. We got to tap our reserves. You know, the Chinese and the Russians, again, I'm not blaming them. They, by the time 214 came thereabouts, they were like, look, we've had enough. We've been between the Cold War and everything else and being disrespected the last 80 or 100 years and taking the ultimate slap. We've had enough. We've got to do something. Okay, maybe they are the 800-pound gorilla, but if we get together, maybe we'll be the 900-pound gorilla. And that's what they're doing. And so through this BRIC Union trading partnership that they've put together, to your point, Dave, as well as installed the financial systems to back it and replace the SWIFT. And oh, by the way, they own a ton of gold and silver now. And oh, by the way, you know, they're trying to position it in such a way where their currencies, their fiat currencies, are not just going to be pure paper and thin air. They're going to be backed by something of value, unlike the West. I mean, you know, look out below, guys, right? And a lot of the West and a lot of the Western leaders, I don't know what they're thinking. But if this was a chess game, we're getting outplayed big time. He's always 2 or 3 steps ahead of us on average. That's my opinion. And when I say that, certain people, other fellow Americans or whatever, they get pissed. Oh, what are you, man? Oh, what are you, a Putin guy? No, I'm not a Putin guy. Just step back and objectively look at it like a chess game. Okay? Go ahead. What? U.S.?
United States politicians are mostly lawyers. Lawyers.
Right.
Okay. The country is run by banksters, okay, and big businesses. All right. China's run by engineers and people who actually know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about an engineering term or a physics term,
yeah,
force. Do you know the product of force?
Force equals mass times acceleration.
Bingo. It's a very, very important thing to remember because mass is how big you are, and acceleration is how fast you're moving. Mm-hmm. And you get a big force moving, and it's going to be hard to stop. It's not impossible, but it usually takes either an equal force, like you ever see 2 waves, they, waveform, they cancel each other out. So, there's either going to be a huge battle or there's going to be an overwhelming victory here.
Okay.